Brother Tom, we're down to about 10, 15 minutes at the most right now, and I don't want to back you up too far, so whenever you have to cut out of here, you just let me know. I hit a timer when you said about 25 minutes. I grabbed my phone and I started hitting the timer because I don't want to mess up your schedule at all. You're extremely busy, and we're just so thankful you could be with us for a small moment of time here tonight. But just on an overall, a general viewpoint, as far as end times go right now, and you read the book of Revelation, and your understanding of the Bible is astounding to me. When you think about Bible prophecy, when you think about the end times, and when you think about where we are right now, how close is all this, Brother Tom? The return of the Lord, the rise of the Antichrist. What are you trekking with now? I hope you understand my question. It's like a general overview of what you're looking at, where you think we are on the prophetic timeline right now.
Well, again, you mentioned that you were listening to a program the other day where I was talking about different things that I think that people ought to be watching for. I think maybe it was the 4 things or 5 things that I had listed that people ought to be watching for in 2015 that connect to this current Pope. I think that the Pope has put himself out there. I think that he definitely is one of the personalities that I myself am going to be watching. And why would that be true? Well, first of all, because any day now, this month, he is supposed to put forward an encyclical, which is a rare and important document, an authoritative document that is published by a Pope, in which he provides moral guidance, but more than that, he speaks as the voice of God. It's kind of a vicarious filii Dei moment in which he is speaking as the voice of God on a moral issue. So this encyclical will be taken by all of the bishops around the world. It'll be given to all of the over 1 billion Roman Catholics in the world, and it will become a mandate, something that they have to believe in and something that they have to aspire to or something that they have to promote. And the question is, what is this encyclical going to say? Now, we're going to find out, right away. We're going to find out in the next few days or this month, as I understand it. But even some of the conservative Catholics are very concerned about it. They want to know why the Pope has essentially stepped away from talking about theological issues and has taken up a political issue, an environmental issue. And we're going to have to just wait and see. But I do have some concerns about it because, first of all, he also is going to speak in front of the United Nations, which I think is kind of a tell about where this encyclical is going to come down in terms of its language. Because, in the United Nations, years ago, they adopted what a lot of people call Agenda 21 principles. Those are not mandatory for the member states, but they could become mandatory, especially if you have somebody like the Pope out there who is advocating for them. And the reason that I think the Pope might advocate certain Agenda 21 issues is because of the language he has used publicly, where he has used phrases like human ecology and your carbon footprint. So he seems to be borrowing from some of the very same language that was originally adopted by the United Nations. Now, why should we care about any of that? Well, because, this could become part of a totalitarianistic, even an antichrist kind of global government system. Agenda 21 issues, environmental issues, could take away your right to own private property. Even if you're allowed to own private property, it could restrict your use of that property, whether or not you could raise a garden, things like that, whether you could capture the rainwater off the top of your house to put it into a cistern so that you could use it for emergency uses. There are states already where people are fighting issues like that, but this originated with the United Nations Agenda 21 issues, but it could be even worse than that. Agenda 21 issues could limit how many children you're allowed to have, whether or not you're even allowed to have a car. And this goes back to some of the 1970s, 1980s issues that came out of the environmental movement, the Goddess Earth movement, the greening of the church and society, Al Gore and all that. I had a friend back in those days named Samantha Smith who wrote a couple of different books. One was called Goddess Earth. I forget what the other one was called. That were fairly heavy investigations into some of this language that was winding up in the United Nations. So I think that's one thing to watch right now. One other part of this whole environmental question, however, could be whether the Pope would include language that takes this from the greening of the church, environmental issues and Agenda 21 issues, to the issues of Gaia, divinity. Some of the oldest pagan religions in the world and all around the world, and from almost every major ancient culture, was this belief that the earth is actually a living, sentient being to whom we owe devotion. And so the earth itself was literally worshipped as an entity, and that we were to be at one, not just at one with this entity, but it was idolatrous. We were to worship the entity. So in Christian centers, we might say that Christians would certainly have a responsibility to be good stewards of the earth, but stewardship is entirely different than worshiping the earth. We would say we could be stewards of the earth, but all of our worship and devotion goes to God, who uses the earth perhaps as an instrument to bless us with things like food and things like that. But we would never worship the earth. We only give devotion to God. Where in Gaiaism, that whole role is reversed. The earth literally becomes the mother of God. And these are things, of course, in Catholicism that can get quite confusing. So that's one thing I think we need to really watch out for what's going to happen here this week, next week, when the Pope issues his encyclical. The second thing is he also has announced that he is this year going to call together a summit of all of the major religions of the world to work towards global unity. And that, too, is very prophetic, because I think that we're living in a time when a man of superior intelligence, wit, charm, diplomacy is going to appear on the world scene as a savior. And right now, this Pope has a 95% popularity rating. He's extraordinarily popular, more so than any man on the face of the earth today. He rates higher than everybody, including the presidents of nations. And he has something like a 70% popularity rating among evangelicals. So when this guy starts talking about calling all the major religions of the world together for purposes of global unity, you could literally be looking at the formation of a one-world church. And if I had time, I could describe how I think certain trigger events could work in favor of that would cause both the nations of the earth and the religious centers of the earth to temporarily at least lay down their differences and come together under one global umbrella. And I think this Pope would be right at the center of that. Very quickly, another thing, the Pope is not only going to address the United Nations, but he's also going to address a joint session of the United States Congress. This has never happened before. So we're literally talking about the merging of politics and religion, which I have believed all of my adult life is the platform on which the Antichrist will arrive. And then fourthly, there are conservative Catholics right now that are implying to me that this encyclical may include language that connects to what's called the many worlds theory. Now, this is a theory that is very much espoused by many of the Opus Dei level theologians in the Roman Catholic Church. It's what makes them talk about aliens, and we would accept them as our space brothers. A lot of that theology grows out of what's called many worlds. And if you might have seen the remake of that old movie, The Day the Earth Stood Still, the original version of that movie, the aliens come to the Earth because we're developing nuclear armament, and they want to warn us about that. But in the remake of that a couple of years ago with Keanu Reeves, the aliens come to the world to warn us that we are misusing Gaia, that we are abusing our power over the Earth. In other words, their message is humans are the disease, and we need to be eradicated for the welfare of the planet itself. And I'm being told by some of my Catholic insiders that might somehow be cleverly written into this encyclical, and it kind of opens the door for something else that I think this Pope is going to do, and that is sometime, either, and I don't think he's going to do it in this encyclical. I think he might make a statement in the encyclical that later this year, this is what I'm being told, later this year, he's going to publish another paper. It might be an encyclical, it might just be a dogma that is issued by the Pope, or even issued by the Pope's University in Rome, and it's something he endorses. But the bottom line is it's going to have to do with astrobiology. And here's what a lot of people don't know, is that Pope Francis, before he became a Jesuit, before he entered the ministry, he earned degrees in science. He had an interest in astrobiology. And furthermore, he's got a long-term relationship going all the way back to the state that he comes out of, with Jose Gabel Funes, who is the current leader of the VORG, the Vatican Observatory Research Group. And Jose Funes, Argentina was the word that I was looking for. Jose Funes recently, in a interview with the Catholic press, he said the Pope is dealing with all of the things that he has to deal with in the world right now, like ISIS and things like that. But he said very soon the Pope is going to turn his attention to the subject of astrobiology. Now, Jose Funes is the head of the Vatican Observatory Research Group, and he has been a friend, a personal friend, a close friend of Pope Francis for many, many years. So he's got inside information, and I'd love to know what made him say that to the Catholic press. But the research that Chris Putnam and I have been doing from Mount Graham, and then, of course, we had to go back to Mount Graham, and the book that we're going to be publishing, On the Path of the Immortals, takes us right back to the astronomers from the Vatican, and Guy Consolmagno, who I've interviewed now 5 times, from Rome, and they are preparing doctrine right now at the Pope's University that goes through a process of being accepted and then becoming church doctrine that is spooky, to say the least, my friend.